last 2 weeks, we have had 26 adults, children, and students give their lives to Christ for the very first time here at Daybreak. Amazing. I was going to walk off stage if you didn't respond that way, so good job. We're good. It's really been incredible. What God is doing here at Daybreak right now, I think, is really special. I get to see a lot of different things around the country, and God is moving here at our church, and I'm so grateful. Thank you for being a part of it. And so because of that, we got some brand new people in the family of God here with us in the house watching on Daybreak Live, and we're glad you're with us. People are coming to Christ in our student ministries, and Riley's here in our service, our student pastor. And Riley, I'm just so proud of you, the job that you do with our students and the team. So I want to thank you. And I want to just give a shout out. They're not here with us right here in the room, but Chris and Rachel, who lead our kids for Daybreak Kids back in our Hiptown area, and what God is doing there. It's pretty awesome. And growth groups, people are coming to Christ. Here in this room on Daybreak Live, down with our students, our kids, it's just happening everywhere. So it's a pretty exciting time for us. So I'm grateful to be a part of this amazing movement. And if you're a guest or if you're newer here to Daybreak, we just want to welcome you to this community and hope that you can find a place here, that you can find a place that can help you settle into your life and your faith and continue to take next steps as God gives you the strength and the vision to do that. So it's really been a pretty amazing time. So we're in week 2 of this series. Hopefully you have a growth guide. We talk about these every week, but we've got something to share from what we read this week. If you're a part of that, if you don't have a growth guide and you're here in the building, as you go out, if you take a right, you can pick one up in the lounge. And as we're here in week 2, I'm excited to share what God has for us today out of one of our readings. And I just want to mention that in 2 weeks, I'm going to be giving an announcement about the documentary that I've been working on. Some of you know about this, some of you don't. But for the last 3 years, we've been working on this thing, and this picture was taken back in 2020. I did a walk across the Midwest from Indiana to Kansas on something called the Trail of Death, and I get asked every week by someone what's going on with it. I haven't talked about it in a while, but we have a really exciting update that I want to share with you in 2 weeks on Sunday morning, and really go a little bit in depth about what is going to happen with this project and this film, so I can't wait for that. As I was out walking, I got a call, this is back in 2020, from my oldest daughter, Olivia, and she said, hey, there's this guy that you know, and they had been dating for a few months at the time, and he would like to come walk with you, and she was referring to her boyfriend at the time, Kyle, and it sounded innocent enough to me, so I thought, yeah, let's do it. So you see some pictures here. So Kyle shows up on a Saturday. We were right on the border of Illinois and Missouri, if I remember right by the Mississippi. And so we start taking this walk, and about 5 minutes into this very innocent time that I was expecting, do you see where this is going? At a vulnerable state when I'm out on my own, and he begins to talk to me about how much he really loves my daughter Olivia, and blah, blah, blah is what I'm hearing, you know what I mean? And he's like, man, she's the best. I could really see a future. And I'm thinking, really? I mean, right now, here, really? And he popped the question to me, can I pop the question to your daughter? And so I said yes. I said, okay, that's good. And we had actually a great conversation. And I'm so grateful that, first of all, that you chose to talk to me, which says a lot about Kyle. But I'm really grateful for him as a part of our family. They got married just later that month, man. They just went right to it. They started dating in February. He asked her on July 2nd of that year, and then they got married in December. So that's kind of the way to do it, I guess. But Kyle's here with me this morning, Kyle Williamson. I'm going to invite Kyle to come up here because there's something that I want him to share with us. So, yeah, Kyle, good to have you here. Thanks for being a good son.
I've also never had the chance to publicly defend this walk that I had. So before you ask any questions,
okay. Go
If
ahead.
you were about to go on a 4-hour walk with a potential future father-in-law, you'd be a little nervous, right? Right? So I knew I had to get that question out of the way the
Yeah.
first 15 minutes, or I would have been a mess the whole time. So, yeah, I was grateful that I did get to trap you, though, and we had a good
Yeah.
conversation for a while.
So yeah, you got it away. Then I was a mess for the rest of the time. So
That's right.
thank you.
Yeah.
You've been great. I'm great. So grateful for you, Kyle. And we just celebrated this week 14 years of our ministry, Never the Same. And some of you were a part of an event we did this week here at Daybreak to talk about the future of the ministry and where things are going as we reach students around the country. And Kyle joined our team this year, and Kyle and our daughter Olivia are traveling and doing a lot of connections and networking around the country for students and schools. And I want you to hear a little bit about what God is doing. And I'm going to bring back later some of the things he's going to share. But Kyle, you and Olivia recently got back from a trip and you're planning another one. Talk about what you saw and where you were.
Yeah, so my wife and I, Olivia, we got the opportunity to travel to the New England area. Just a couple weeks ago, we got to go to seven of the states that are up in that area, all in a matter of a week. And it was incredible. A lot of times when you think, and what I was going into thinking of the New England area, we kind of have our stereotypes in our head of cold people, and it's very post-Christian. The stat that they actually kept saying to us was that about only 2% of people in the New England area are followers of Jesus. And so this obviously broke our heart. And as we went into those meetings, we had a great friend who introduced us to a lot of pastors and leaders. We're kind of curious, and we wanted to know what the culture, what the state of that area was like as far as the church and what God was doing there. And we've been traveling for, since camp, really, going to different corners of the country and hearing what God is doing. It's been really encouraging. Everywhere we go, even though they have different challenges and there's different things that are going well in that area, what we've seen consistently is a hunger for God, specifically in the next generation with middle school and high school students. And every single meeting we were at, we would engage with the pastors. We'd talk to them about what's going on in their churches and in their schools. And they got so excited to hear about an opportunity for students to pray for their schools on a weekly basis with Claim Your Campus. And it was amazing. It was actually so cool. We had a meeting on a Thursday in Connecticut, and we were traveling around and going to, Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, all around. And then Monday, we get a text from one of the pastors we met on Thursday with a selfie picture of a group that started that day. And so we had a meeting on Thursday. They announced it at youth group on Sunday, and then they started praying on Monday, which is really incredible.
So Claim Your Campus, we're seeing as students, Claim Your Campus is student-led prayer groups at middle and high schools, and we're seeing this. When students bring this in, this isn't teachers doing this, isn't adults or parents, this is students doing this. And in such a tough area of the country in terms of like the saturation of faith, it's a really big deal for a student to do that at their school. And this is changing schools. And you and Olivia really are becoming missionaries to the country. You're going to be traveling throughout the winter in a lot of different states and living on the road. And we're excited about what you're going to see. Yeah,
we decided that we're going to give up our home situation right now and actually live in the RV and travel.
When he says the RV, he means my RV.
Yeah, the RV, yeah.
So you took my daughter, now you're taking my RV.
I'm just trying to milk as much out of this as I can, Jeff.
You know what?
So yeah, me and my wife Olivia, we are having the opportunity. We're going to start in February. We're really just kind of forsaking all for a period of time, and we're going to go out to Florida and then go up to North Carolina and make a sweep across the South. And really what we experienced in New England, we're wanting to see across the country, where we are able to have meetings and engage with pastors, hear what's going on, hear their heart for their cities and their states, and then to be able to share with them the mission and vision of Claim Your Campus, to be able to see God move in the schools in our country, which we're really excited about.
Yeah, when you were in New England, as we were talking, you saw a really stark difference in the church there. When I say the church, I mean churches and leaders there. And explain what you saw.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things we saw in the Church of New England is that there's a really big difference between the churches that follow and submit to Jesus as Lord, as the one true God, and then churches that may believe in Jesus, but they also may believe in other ways to receive salvation, other ways to heaven. And I think that divide has caused, one, the churches who do love and follow Jesus to be extremely unified. That was one of the amazing things we saw in that area, is that the churches that loved and followed Jesus rooted for each other. There was no competition, across the block or anything like that. It was all, everyone was excited about what God was doing and moving. But there were also those churches that did not preach the gospel in their services, that do not believe the truths, the fundamental truths of Scripture. And it's really quite sad. We're driving through all these towns, and I'm sure you guys all have the picture in mind of like a beautiful fall colors in the background, and the white church of New England, and all those churches are no longer preaching the gospel. They believe like universalist ideals, and so it was really interesting seeing that divide in that area where there's the strong core Christians, Bible-believing Christians right there, but then there's also that group that eventually veered off and are now no longer preaching the truth.
And the question that brings up is, how does that happen? So how does a part of our country where our faith really was birthed in a sense as America grew, how does it die in a certain area, and what's this happen in these churches? And you actually were able to find the root of that.
Yeah.
So talk about what that is.
Yeah, one of the opportunities we had to do when we were out there is we visited Northampton, Massachusetts, which is kind of the birthplace of the first Great Awakening. If you guys know revival history, you can actually, or if you want to know, you can just Google that, First Great Awakening in America, and you can learn about a guy named Jonathan Edwards and some other amazing Christian leaders that what they did is they revolutionized the church and what was happening as far as Christians in our country at that time. They did some new and innovative things, and they were also experiencing God in a new way. They were feeling God in their emotions, and when they felt God stir them, it would lead them and cause them to do something about it. And that was really interesting. That group with Jonathan Edwards and his gang was called the New Lights. I know you guys are in your series Nightlights, kind of interesting. Yeah. So they were this group called the New Lights, and they were excited about what God was doing, and really it was the next generation. Like all the revivals in that time were starting up from high school to college students. But then there was this other group called the Old Lights, and they were people that didn't want to see change. They saw the emotions of the young people. They saw what God was doing in the next generation, and instead of embracing it and kind of, I like to say the term like riding the wave of what God is doing. Like if God's a wave or a river, as we talked about earlier this week, we want to like join in what God is doing. And those people were opposed to what God was doing in the next generation. And those people that were opposed, those old lights, they were the leaders of the churches that eventually veered off the path and no longer preach truth today. So it's very interesting seeing that back in that time with the New Lights and the Old Lights, that when you don't embrace what God is doing, when you're not like following Him in every step, that eventually kind of one step leads to another, and now you're in a totally different path.
Yeah, we're going to come back to that, just that concept, because that's going to speak to us a little bit later. But Kyle, thank you for sharing today, and let's thank Kyle for being here with us this morning. Thank you. I want to share just one quick personal update. So yesterday, our family was all together, actually. So all of our daughters live in different states, and we all gathered together. It was our daughter's birthday Friday, Lauren, and as we were together, we got a phone call. It's one of those phone calls that you don't want to receive. And the news was that our uncle named Mark Bartlett passed away unexpectedly yesterday. And he and his wife, Ethel, which is Ariana's aunt through birth, live in Jackson, Michigan. And Mark, from a human perspective, died way too soon. And yet we know God has a way of working that we don't understand. But it was a very difficult day yesterday as we drove from where we were together as a family in Indiana back up to Michigan. And that's where Ariana and our daughters are this morning. So I'm sure they're watching this morning. But we would appreciate your prayers, the family, and for our family, for Mark's mother as well, and just that God would have glory in something like this that's very tragic. And it's a reminder that as I stand before you, and every week as I stand up here and I look across all of you here, and as I think about you watching on Daybreak Live, it always dawns on me that there's some of you here, perhaps many of you, that are dealing with something very difficult. And I just want you to know, in times like this, that I've found that just looking up, looking to the hope that we have in Jesus, that he is the answer. It doesn't mean it won't be difficult. It doesn't mean there won't be a struggle. It's not going to take the pain away, but it will provide a hope for you that you will not find anywhere else in this world. And if you don't know this Savior, this Jesus that we're talking about, we mentioned it last week, that Jesus is God. He came here from heaven to live among us and to know what it means to live this life, was tempted in every way and yet was without sin. And he can provide the way for us to know him. So I'm grateful for that hope this morning, and we definitely appreciate your prayers. So I want to start today by looking at John chapter 9. It was one of our readings today. And John, this beautiful book, in fact, as I've been thinking about it, I just continue to hear people, and I continue to be changed by our first series, The Road, about the Ten Commandments. But as we've gotten into this series, I've realized that perhaps, I don't know if I could have a favorite writing or book in the Bible, but this might be it. I'm talking about this book of John, written by one of Jesus' disciples. But he shares this beautiful story in John 9, and here's what it says. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, "Rabbi," which is a word for teacher, "who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus, "but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." And after saying this, he spit on the ground, and he made some mud with the saliva, and he put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam." This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the man who used to sit and beg?" And some claimed that he was, and others said, "No, it only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." "How then were your eyes open?" they asked. And he replied, "The man they call Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes, and then he told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see." So one of the questions that comes up here is this connection between sin and suffering. So notice that the disciples, when they see this man that's a beggar, this man that has never seen in his life, that has been there, that they're familiar with. He's probably a person that was, I would think, fairly well known in the community. And as he's there begging, the disciples get into this philosophical discussion with Jesus. "Okay, Jesus, why does this happen? Why is this man suffering? What's happening? Who is to blame for this?" And they began to ask this question. And Jesus flips the script on him in the conversation. Now, some of the beliefs that people of that time, especially like Jewish believers and scholars, they had some kind of what I would call very unique ideas about why there is suffering in the world. One of the things they believed is that you could actually, some Jewish religious teachers of the law during the time of Jesus believed that you could sin in your mother's womb. I don't know what you would do. I don't know if you'd like saying bad words in there or what, but I can't imagine really much you could do in there. I don't know how that works, but they literally had a belief where they thought you could sin in your mother's womb, and as a result, that would carry over into your life. Some believed in the preexistence of souls. So in other words, that before you were even born, before your soul entered into a body, it resided somewhere, and you could actually do something wrong there even before you were born. But Jesus here doesn't get into that conversation. And a lot of times when we have suffering in our lives or for someone else, we may think, well, why is this happening? And in our last series, when we talked about the road, I want to pull back up Exodus 20. And this is where some people's ideas come from. So God says, "You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in the heaven above or on earth beneath or the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God." And here's where it comes from. punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. So this is probably one of the sources of the question that the disciples asked. Hey, so what happened here? Did he sin somewhere, or did his parents sin? Why is he suffering? And Jesus here really didn't want to talk about the why. You know, we live in a world of suffering. But I want you to imagine, I want us to think here for a minute and try to experience what it would be like. Just imagine living in a complete world of darkness your whole life. You've never seen one thing. You've never been able to open your eyes and see the people's voices that you hear, your parents, your surroundings. And so the disciples said, why did this happen? Why the suffering? And Jesus was more interested in the what than the why. Notice what Jesus said. Jesus said, this happened so that God could be glorified in his life. You may be experiencing a darkness in your life. You may be experiencing something that you don't understand. You may be experiencing something that doesn't feel fair, a loss. Just like I said, our family is experiencing a loss right now at this moment that doesn't seem fair, that doesn't make sense, that has no answers. We have no answers. You may be in a situation now where you have no answers to your situation, and Jesus wants to point you not towards the why, because if you ask the why, you may never have that question answered. But what he wants you to think about is what? What can God do? How can God be glorified? In your life, whatever you're facing right now, you need to consider the fact that God could be taking you through something to show you something that you've never seen before. That God can do something only through this situation, only through this pain, only through this longing for answers, through this struggle. The nation of Israel exists today, and it all came from one man whose name we find in the Bible named Jacob. And it says that Jacob wrestled with God. And Jacob has he had this supernatural interaction with God himself. God renames him from Jacob to Israel, and he says, your name is now Israel, and that name means to struggle with God and overcome. And let me say to you that our life will be filled with struggles, but we are the people that when we know and follow God, when we trust him, we're the people that can go through the struggle and overcome. It may not make sense to you right now, but God is working, and God can be glorified, and God can use any situation to bring glory to himself through your life. So I want you to imagine the moment that this man begins to see. For the first time in his life, to see a sunrise, a sunset. You notice that first picture is what the actual place where this happened, where he began to see for the first time. That was the actual place that still exists today in Israel, the Pool of Siloam. They're actually renovating it right now, and they're hoping to open it sometime soon in the future for the public. They found where it is. This is a real thing. So we see a demonstration of God's power in this moment. We see that Jesus has this interaction, and this is maybe what you might call kind of a two-step miracle. I don't know if you picked this up. But Jesus does something very unique that when you really think about him actually doing it, it sounds kind of gross. That Jesus spit on the ground, and you have to have a lot of spit to make mud. And he made mud, and then he put it on his eyes, and then he said, I want you to go and I want you to wash. And so this man does it, and he sees for the first time. Now, if you've ever been around somebody that's not able to see, that's blind, legally or completely, I was thinking about my childhood home where I was born, and the first few years of my life where I lived. And next door to us was a couple, and both of them were completely blind. They had a child that they had together in their marriage, and they were able to function somehow. And I've thought about the logistics. When I was a child, I knew about it, but it didn't really dawn on me how significant that was, and what a challenge and what an incredible thing it was for two people, a married couple, a man and a wife, to live together and never be able to see anything. Never to be able to see their child. Never be able to see the world around us. He got up every morning and worked just up the street, and I'd see him with his walking stick every morning, going to work, and in the afternoon coming back. This man had never seen before, but it was a demonstration of God's power. And we may not understand the circumstances of why things happen, but yet we see the power of God working in this moment to do something that had never been done. In fact, it led to a conversation later that this man had, because people came and they wondered, did this really happen? And we read already, is this really the man, or does he look like him? You know, what's really the real story? Because I'm sure the news spread. It was crazy that someone who had never, ever seen in their life now all of a sudden is able to see. I mean, that is a supernatural moment, without a doubt. But that demonstration of God's power, notice how it came through a difficult struggle in his life. We see the end of the story. We go, oh, it's great he could see, but for the years and the years and the years that he wasn't able to see. And he gets this moment from God, this miracle in his life. And if you're going through something and it's a struggle and you feel overwhelmed by it and it doesn't make sense, I would remind you that in those moments is when you can see the power of God most clearly. On June 11th, 2015, in the wee hours of the morning, I get a phone call from Grand Rapids Police. It's one of those phone calls, again, that's pretty unforgettable. And they said, come down to your office. And this is a little bit of the inside. That the night before, someone had broken into our national ministry office of Never the Same and set it on fire. Just 2 days before our staff was leaving for our first camp, and destroyed almost everything that we had. And I would tell you, in the midst of doing all this good work, in the midst of trying to help students, this felt unbelievably unfair. That someone, probably random, we don't even know to this day, would break into our little random office without even a sign on it and come in and just set it all on fire and destroy everything that we had. Two things were significant to me about that moment. One was we were just launching our brand new Claim Your Campus mobile app for phones. This was 8 years ago. And this was a big deal. We invested a lot, and we were about ready to launch this across the country. And it was the day that our app was finally finished, coincidentally. We'd also just completely completed our inventory for all of our Bible curriculum that students were using around the world just a few days before that. And then this happened, and we lost everything. And some of it we never recovered. And it's unfair. And if you're going through a situation that's unfair, I just want to remind you that God's power is there. Listen to what T.D. Jakes, great preacher, says. Why doesn't God do what's easy? He doesn't. He does what's divine. It's always going to be complicated. Why did God choose a barren woman named Hannah to give birth to the prophet Samuel? Why did God use a boy named David to kill Goliath? Why did God send a backslider named Jonah to preach to Nineveh? Why did God use a century-old man named Abraham to have Isaac? Why did God use a young virgin named Mary to give birth to Jesus? Why did Jesus tell a man whose hand was withered, stretch forth your hand? Who tells a blind man to go wash in a pool so that he could see, but he couldn't see how to get there? Who stands in front of a tomb and tells a dead man to come forth? That's when you know it's God. Whenever it's hard, it's God. Whenever it's difficult, it's God. Whenever it goes against the grain, it's God. You tell you, if you're struggling right now, if there's something that's difficult, know that God is right there in the midst of it with you. Whether you know it or not, whether you believe it or not, whether you want it or not, God is there in those moments of struggle. There's a great quote from a leadership book called Leadership Pain by Samuel Chan. He says this: the difference between where you are and where God wants you to be is the amount of pain that you're willing to endure. I'm going to say that again. The difference between where you are and where God wants you to be is the amount of pain that you're willing to endure. Some of you are going through a lot of pain right now. Let me just remind you that God is moving you forward through something to the other side of it. That there's a miracle on the other side. You may not understand everything that you're dealing with, but trust me, God is working. He's moving. There's something happening there. And then, after all this, we see the reaction of what happens to this man. There's what I call the reaction to the interaction. This man has an interaction with Jesus, and then there's all this reaction happening all around him. Because what happens here is this man is miraculously healed, and then there's all these skeptics that come forth. And of all the people that were skeptics, it was the religious people. It was the people that should have known, that should have seen, that should have understood, that should have believed, and yet they come forth and they begin to question him. Very skeptically so. Who is this man? What happened to you? Are you really this man? Were you really born blind? And they interview him and they interview his parents. And then listen to what happens. He is expelled from the temple, the place of worship, because he wasn't giving the answers that the religious people wanted. And then in John, later on in the chapter, verse 35, we see this. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out. And when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir?" the man asked. "Tell me so that I may believe in him." And Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." And the man said, "Lord, I believe." And it says he worshiped him. Now notice there, that is a change. He's not worshiping a human being. He knows he's God. And Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." Now some Pharisees, these were the religious leaders, they were with him and they heard him say this and they asked, "What, are we blind too?" And Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you see, your guilt remains." Jesus said he's come for judgment so that the blind will see and those who see will become blind. Jesus had this way of contrasting things. And in this beautiful writing of John about the contrast and the contrast of light and darkness, Jesus here mentions light and darkness a few times. And he says, "I have come so that the blind can see." And I'm so grateful that 26 people in the last 2 weeks here at Daybreak have said, "I can now see." But something happens when we have an interaction with Jesus. There's a reaction. You know, at our camps this summer, we had, I would say in 24 years of having this camp across the country, I've never seen the spiritual force of change that I've ever experienced in 24 years. And I don't say that lightly, because I've seen a lot. We had a church there that didn't really understand or agree with what was happening, and they kind of began to become skeptical, and that skepticism turned into criticism. And we stayed up with them in the wee hours of the night one week, trying to defend ourselves and what had happened. And here's what I realized. That when you have an interaction with Jesus, either you're blind to it or you see it. It'll either cause you to have vision or it'll cause you to be blind. And in your life right now, if there's something that you feel like is blocking your way and you feel like, I just can't get through this, and I need to know that God is there. I need him. I want to say to you today, let him be your firm foundation. Let him be the thing that you build upon. Let him be the never moving, never shaking, never quaking, never leaving foundation of your life that you can build on and know that it will always be there in the struggles, in the difficulties, in the times where there's so many questions that it doesn't even make sense. If you allow Jesus to be that, if you let him be your firm foundation, you'll never, ever be shaken by the struggles of this life. You'll never be distracted by the questions that might plague your mind that you don't understand, the whys. Why? And Jesus wants to take you to the what, and that what is that God may be glorified. That God may be glorified. That's the goal, that God would be glorified in our lives. And when God is glorified, our lives are so much better when we see him working. We're about to sing a really, really powerful song. And this song speaks to Christ being our firm foundation. As I was preparing and praying, I just sensed that you need to have a moment where you're really challenged. Is Christ the foundation of my life? That maybe there's something really difficult. And we try to mix things up and do things here different. But here's what I'm going to invite you to experience if you would like today. We're going to sing this song. And if you're watching on Daybreak Live, my challenge for you is to interact with those that are there that are wanting to connect with you. If you want to have a conversation offline about overcoming a struggle in your life. Those of you here in the house, as we sing this song, I'm going to ask you to stand here in a moment. And I'm going to invite you to do something really simple. It's just to step to the front here today and just say, I need a moment with God today. I need to declare that he is the foundation of my life. And not going to be asked to say anything or do anything. It's just kind of a statement for you to God to say, I just need this right now. I need to be reminded that God is there. So I'm going to invite you to stand right now here in the house. And as we sing this song, if that's you, I just invite you to come and just to stand in the front and just pray. And when the song's over, I'm going to come up and close our service in prayer. But it's just a moment for you to have with God this morning. Maybe you need that miracle and you're looking and you've been so distracted by the whys that you've missed the whats that God has for you today. So I invite you to respond this morning as we sing together.